The signal came in on a Tuesday, though days of the week meant very little when you lived in a metal box orbiting Neptune. Lieutenant Carla Webb had been on shift for 11 hours when her console lit up with something she had never seen before. She had spent 4 years aboard Outpost Gideon, listening to the noise of the universe, pulsars spinning, dead stars humming, the occasional garbled bounce of humanity's own signals reflecting off distant objects. She knew what space sounded like. And this was not any of those things. It was structured, repeating, faint, like someone whispering from the other end of a hallway that stretched across 1,000 light years. But it was real. Something out there, far beyond the edge of every map humanity had ever drawn, was speaking. She ran the signal through 3 different filters to make sure she was not imagining it. She flagged it, sent it up the chain, and then sat back in her chair and stared at her screen while her heart beat in a way it had not beaten in a very long time. Within 6 hours, Dr. Nora Castillo arrived at Gideon. She was a xenolinguist, one of the few people in human space whose entire job was to figure out how to talk to things that were not human. She was small, sharp-eyed, and had a habit of muttering to herself while she worked. Carla liked her immediately. Nora spent 2 days with the signal. She broke it apart, rebuilt it, compared it to every known alien communication pattern in the database, and found nothing that matched. This was new, completely, terrifyingly new. On the 3rd day, she walked into the briefing room where Captain Danny Holt and Commander Vince Daly were waiting, along with a live quantum link to Admiral Greg Lawson back at Fleet Command on Earth. She put her tablet on the table and brought up her translation. The language is unlike anything we have on record, but the structure is simple. Whoever sent this wanted it to be understood by anyone who found it. The core message translates roughly to this: Any who hear, we require assistance. Our light is failing. The room was quiet for a moment. A distress call, Vince said. That is the most likely reading, yes, Nora replied. Admiral Lawson's voice came through the link, steady and calm the way it always was. Where is it coming from? Specialist Katie Dunn, the convoy's navigation and jump drive engineer, pulled out the star chart. The signal's origin was deep in uncharted space, far beyond any system humanity had visited or even surveyed. 3 consecutive faster-than-light jumps, each one would take them further from home, further from backup, further from anything familiar. That is a long way out, Lawson said. Yes, sir, Danny replied. And we have no idea what is out there. No, sir. Lawson was quiet again. Danny had served under him for years and knew what that silence meant. The Admiral was thinking, and when Greg Lawson thought, he usually came to a decision that made everyone around him nervous. Take your convoy, Lawson said. The Iron Meridian, the Pale Horse, and the Blackwood. Go see what this is. If it is a distress call, assess the situation and report back. Do not start anything. Do not promise anything. Just look and tell me what you find. Understood, Danny said. The convoy launched within 36 hours. 3 ships, a flagship, and 2 escort frigates, sliding out of Neptune's orbit and into the black. Danny stood on the bridge of the Iron Meridian and watched the solar system shrink behind them until it was just another dot among billions. He was not a young man anymore, 44 years old, with more time in space than on any planet. He had fought in 2 border skirmishes, led a rescue operation in the Kuiper Belt that earned him a commendation he never talked about, and buried 7 friends whose names were etched on a wall back on Earth that he visited every time he went home. He was tired in the way that people who have seen too much are tired, not in his body, but somewhere deeper. And yet when that signal had come through, something in him had woken up. Someone out there was asking for help. That was enough. The first jump went smoothly. The second jump went smoothly. During the transit between the second and third jumps, Carla picked up more fragments of the signal. It was stronger now. Nora spent hours refining her translation, and one evening she came to Danny's quarters with a look on her face that he did not like. "The word I translated as assistance," she said, sitting down across from him. "It has a second meaning, an older one buried in the linguistic roots. It does not just mean help." "What else does it mean?" Danny asked. "Witness," Nora said. "It can also mean witness." Danny looked at her for a long moment. "So they might not be asking for help. They might be asking someone to see them, to know they were here." Danny leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. He was tired. They were a long way from home, heading towards something they did not understand, and now the one thing they thought they knew, that someone needed help, might not even be true. "We keep going," he said. Nora nodded. She had expected him to say that. Katie warned everyone that the exit might be rough, and she was right. The Iron Meridian shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and for a few seconds the bridge was filled with the groan of metal and the flicker of lights adjusting. Then the view screen cleared, and nobody said a word. The star system in front of them was a graveyard. Thousands of ships, broken, burned, torn apart, drifted in the void like leaves after a storm. Some were enormous, bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Others were small, barely larger than a shuttle. All of them were dead. Debris fields stretched in every direction, catching the light of the system's pale sun, and glittering like a field of shattered glass. Among the wreckage, Danny could see the remains of orbital stations, habitation rings, and structures he could not even identify. Whatever had been here, whatever civilization had built all of this, had been torn apart. Carla's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "Captain, I am reading residual weapon signatures across the entire system. Energy weapons, kinetic impacts, nuclear detonations. This was not a natural disaster." Danny stared at the destruction ahead of them, and felt something cold settle in his chest. "This was a war," Vince said quietly from beside him. Danny gripped the railing in front of him and took a breath. Somewhere out there, past the wreckage and the silence and the drifting dead, someone had sent a message into the dark, hoping that anyone at all would hear it. They had heard it, and now they were here. "Take us in," Danny said. "Slow and careful, and get me a channel to Fleet Command. The Admiral is going to want to hear about this." The Iron Meridian moved forward into the graveyard, and the darkness closed in around them like a hand. They moved through the graveyard for hours. Katie kept the Iron Meridian on a slow, careful path, while Carla scanned everything around them, building a picture of what had happened. It was not a pretty picture. The wreckage belonged to at least two different groups. One had built elegant ships, smooth curved hulls made from a pale metal that still shimmered even when cracked open and burned. The other had built brutal things, dark, angular, covered in heavy armor and weapons. There were far more of the elegant ships destroyed than the dark ones, and that told Danny everything he needed to know about how this fight had gone. On the second day in the system, Carla finally locked onto the source of the original signal. It was coming from the largest planet, a green and blue world that reminded Danny painfully of Earth, except that large sections of its surface were blackened and burning. Orbital platforms that had once circled the planet hung in pieces, and the remains of what looked like a space elevator trailed from the surface like a broken thread. "I have a response to our hails," Carla said, and her voice was tight. "Putting it through." The bridge screen filled with an image that made everyone stop breathing for a moment. The being on the screen was tall and slender, with a body like polished wood and wings folded tight against its back. Its face had large, dark eyes that reflected the light like pools of oil, and when it spoke, the sound was musical, layered, like three voices singing the same word at slightly different pitches. It was beautiful and strange, and it was clearly exhausted. Nora stepped forward, her translator running. "This is High Speaker Olin," she said after a moment, leader of the Vathari Diplomatic Council. Tell them we received their signal, Danny said. Tell them we came to help. Olin's reaction was not what Danny expected. The alien's large eyes blinked slowly, and its wings shifted. A gesture Nora would later explain was deep confusion. Olin spoke again, and this time the musical voice carried something heavy and sad. They say they did not ask for help, Nora translated carefully. The signal was not a request for assistance. It was a record, a final message sent outward so that someone, somewhere, would know the Vathari existed before they were gone. The bridge went silent. Danny felt the words hit him like a physical blow. He had crossed the galaxy because he thought someone was calling for help. Instead, he had found a civilization writing its own obituary. Ask them what happened, Danny said quietly. Over the next several hours, Olin told them everything. The Vathari were ancient. Their civilization stretched back over 12,000 years. They had built a coalition of peaceful species across this region of space. They were scientists, artists, builders. They had no military because they had never needed one. In all their long history, they had never encountered a species that wanted to destroy them. Then the Shrade came. The Shrade were not like anything the Vathari had ever seen. They were a civilization that lived entirely aboard warships, billions of them, spread across a fleet so vast it darkened the stars when it arrived in a system. They moved from region to region, consuming everything, resources, technology, entire populations, and then moved on. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply took. They had arrived in Vathari space 6 cycles ago and begun a systematic campaign of destruction. The Vathari had tried diplomacy, tried offering resources freely, tried everything a peaceful civilization could think of. None of it worked. The Shrade were not interested in coexistence. They were interested in consumption. How many of your people are left? Danny asked through Nora. Olin's answer was quiet. Roughly 900 million. We were 40 billion. Danny closed his eyes. 40 billion lives, reduced to 900 million. He had studied human history enough to know what genocide looked like. And this was it, on a scale that made every dark chapter in humanity's past look small. Vince pulled Danny aside after the transmission ended. They stood in the corridor outside the bridge, and Vince spoke in the low, direct voice he used when things were serious. Danny, I ran the numbers on the wreckage signatures. The Shrade fleet, based on what we are seeing here, is somewhere between 10 and 20,000 warships. We have 3 ships. 3. If the Shrade come back while we are sitting here, we are dead. And so are the Vathari. He had known it since they dropped out of Faster Than Light and saw the graveyard. But knowing something and accepting it were 2 different things. Get me a channel to Lawson, Danny said. The quantum link took a few minutes to establish. When Admiral Lawson's face appeared on the screen, Danny could see that the old man was sitting in his office at Fleet Command, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking like he had not slept in a while. Danny told him everything. He described the Vathari, the Shrade, the burned worlds, the billions dead. He sent visual recordings, the shattered ships, the burning cities, Olin's face as they described the end of their civilization. He held nothing back. When he finished, Lawson set down his coffee and sat very still. The silence stretched on for a long time. Are they worth saving? Lawson asked. Danny did not hesitate. They sent a message into the dark, hoping someone would remember them. Yes, sir. They are worth saving. Another silence. Then Lawson nodded slowly. Hold your position, Captain. Keep the Vathari safe as long as you can. I need to make some calls. The link closed, and Danny stood alone on the bridge for a while, looking at the planet below. The fires were still burning in places, painting the night side of the world in patches of orange and red. Somewhere down there, 900 million beings were waiting to die, and they had made peace with it. They were not even afraid anymore. They were just sad. Danny turned to Vince. How long until the Shrade Vanguard could reach this system? Vince checked his data. Based on the patrol patterns we are picking up on long-range sensors, 5 days, maybe 6. 5 days. Danny had 3 ships, and 5 days to hold a system against an armada that had already killed billions. Get Pete Garza up here, Danny said, and Katie, and Carla. I want everyone thinking about how to make 3 ships look like 30. Over the next 2 days, Danny's crew worked harder than they had ever worked. They deployed decoy drones, programmed to mimic the sensor signatures of full-size warships. They set up electronic warfare screens that would confuse any Shrade scouts trying to scan the system. They moved the 3 real ships constantly, jumping between positions so that anyone watching would see activity across a wide area. It was a bluff, a desperate, exhausting bluff. And Danny knew that when the Shrade finally came in force, it would fall apart in minutes. On the 3rd night, Olin came aboard the Iron Meridian. The alien moved through the human ship with careful, graceful steps, wings folded tight, dark eyes taking in everything. In Danny's small office, they sat across from each other, human and alien, 2 species meeting for the first time against a backdrop of ruin. I do not understand your people, Olin said through Nora's translation. We accepted our end. We made peace with it. Why do you fight for us when there is no hope? Danny was running on stimulants and willpower at this point. He had not slept properly in days. His eyes were red, and his hands shook slightly when he picked up his coffee. But when he looked at Olin, his voice was steady. Because you asked, he said, even if you did not mean to. Olin studied him with those large, dark eyes for a long time, and Danny got the feeling that the alien was seeing something it had never seen before. Not a soldier, not a diplomat, but something else entirely. Something the Vathari had no word for. Outside the viewport, the stars turned slowly, and somewhere in the dark, the Shrade were coming. Admiral Greg Lawson had served Earth for 31 years. He had given hard orders before. Orders that sent people into danger, orders that cost lives, orders that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his quarters, wondering if he had done the right thing. But what he was about to do was different. What he was about to do would either define humanity or break it. He stood before the United Earth Council in a room that was built to be impressive. High ceilings, polished stone floors, flags from every nation that had joined the unified government. 46 council members sat in a curved row before him, their faces serious, their attention sharp. These were the people who decided what humanity did with its power, and right now, Lawson needed them to decide fast. He played Danny's recordings. He showed them the burned planets, the drifting wreckage, the shattered remains of orbital cities where billions had once lived. He showed them Olin's face, calm, dignified, and deeply sad. He showed them the numbers, 40 billion reduced to 900 million. A civilization 12,000 years old, being erased like a mark on a board. When the recordings ended, the room was very quiet. This is happening right now, Lawson said. Not in the past, not in some theoretical future. Right now, as we sit in this room, a species is being wiped out, and we are the only ones who know about it. The debate that followed was exactly what Lawson had expected. Some council members argued that this was not humanity's problem. The Vathari were strangers. The Shrade were powerful beyond anything Earth had faced. Sending the fleet would leave human space exposed. The risks were enormous, and the potential cost in human lives was staggering. Others argued the opposite. Humanity had built its identity on the idea that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were bad. If they turned away from this, knowing what they knew, then every principle they claimed to hold was just words on paper. The debate lasted 4 hours. Lawson stood through all of it, answering questions, providing data, and keeping his voice steady, even when some of the arguments for doing nothing made him want to break something. In the end, the vote was close. 25 in favor, 21 against. Earth would intervene. Lawson did not waste a single minute. The orders went out immediately, spreading across human space at the speed of quantum communication. Every combat-ready ship was recalled. Every patrol was cut short. Every deep space exploration mission was paused. Reserve fleets that had been sitting in orbital storage for years were activated. Their crews scrambled from bases and homes across a dozen worlds. What followed was the largest military mobilization in human history, and it happened in 4 days. Destroyers and frigates from the inner colonies, heavy cruisers from the border patrols, carrier groups from the training grounds near Jupiter. The dreadnought Grey Dawn, the biggest warship humanity had ever built, was pulled from its station above Mars and sent to the staging point near Neptune. The carrier Solace of Rome arrived with its full complement of fighter wings. The heavy cruiser Northfall, fresh from a refit, joined the formation with its new weapons still being calibrated by engineers who work through the night. Over 1,200 warships gathered in the dark beyond Neptune. From a distance, they looked like a cloud of metal, angular, bristling, and very, very angry. Aboard the Iron Meridian, Sergeant Pete Garza stood at a viewport and watched the first wave of ships arrive through long-range sensors. He was a Marine, big, quiet, practical. He had spent his career boarding hostile vessels and fighting in the tight corridors of ships where every corner could kill you. He was not a man who was easily impressed. But watching those numbers climb on the sensor display, 50 ships, then 100, then 300, then more, he felt something move in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. He turned to a young Marine standing next to him, a kid named Sam Ortiz, who was on his first deployment. "I do not think that alien knows what it just did," Garza said. Ortiz looked confused. "What do you mean, Sergeant?" Garza nodded toward the sensor display. "It asked for help. Maybe it didn't mean to, but it asked. And now it's going to find out what happens when humans hear someone asking for help." Meanwhile, Danny and his crew were running out of tricks. The decoy drones were failing one by one. Their power cells were not designed for extended use, and the electronic warfare screens were draining the Iron Meridian systems faster than Katie could compensate. Schrade scout ships had been probing the edges of the system for 2 days, and Danny knew they were not fooled anymore. They were just waiting for the main fleet to arrive before they moved in. Danny had not slept in over 60 hours. His hands shook when he held his coffee. His eyes burned. But every time he thought about resting, he looked at the planet below and saw the fires, and he kept going. Olin had been watching the humans closely during those desperate days. The Vathari had lived for thousands of years and had met many species, but they had never met anything like these small, soft, short-lived beings who refused to stop. The humans ate poorly, slept almost never, argued with each other constantly, and somehow kept fighting. Olin could not understand it. The Vathari way was acceptance. When something could not be changed, you made peace with it. You did not rage against it. But the humans did. They raged and pushed and worked and fought, not because they thought they could win, but because stopping was simply not something they were built to do. On the 5th night, Danny was standing on the bridge, barely keeping his eyes open, when Katie suddenly sat up straight at her console. "Captain," she said, and her voice had a strange quality to it, tight, controlled, like she was trying very hard not to shout. "I am picking up a massive faster-than-light signature forming at the edge of the system." Danny's blood went cold. This was it, the Schrade main fleet. He had always known this moment would come, and he had always known that when it did, his 3 battered ships would not last 5 minutes. "How many contacts?" he asked, and his voice was steady, because he owed his crew that much. Katie stared at her screen. Her fingers moved across the controls. Then she stopped. She looked at the data again. She looked a third time. "Captain," she said, and this time her voice was shaking, but not from fear. "These are not Shrane's signatures." Transponder codes began appearing on the main display. One after another, filling the screen, scrolling faster than anyone could read. Human transponder codes, Earth registry numbers, the Grey Dawn, the Solace of Rome, the Northfall, destroyers, frigates, cruisers, carriers, support ships, troop transports, name after name after name, hundreds and hundreds of them, pouring out of faster-than-light travel in a wall of steel and light that stretched across the void like a sunrise. 1,200 warships, Earth's full fleet, every fighting vessel humanity owned, assembled in one place for the first time in history, and they had come all this way, across uncharted space, through 3 jumps, further from home than any human fleet had ever gone, because a stranger had whispered into the dark, and humans could not bear to let that whisper go unanswered. Carla had tears running down her face. She did not bother wiping them away. Vince gripped the railing so hard, his knuckles turned white. Katie laughed, a short, sharp sound that was half relief and half disbelief. Danny stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he opened a channel to the nearest ship, and Admiral Lawson's voice came through, calm and clear as always. "Captain Holt, this is Admiral Lawson aboard the Grey Dawn. Sorry for the wait. We brought everyone." Danny tried to answer. It took him 2 attempts to get the words out, because his throat had closed up in a way that had nothing to do with being tired. "Welcome to the fight, Admiral," he said. "It is good to see you." Behind the human fleet, the stars burned cold and silent. Ahead of them, a dying civilization waited without hope. And between those two things, 1,200 ships full of humans who had decided that hope was not the Vaetharis to give up. Admiral Lawson wasted no time. Within hours of the fleet's arrival, the Grey Dawn's command center was alive with activity. Tactical officers bent over holographic displays, communications teams coordinating across hundreds of ships, and engineers running final checks on weapon systems that were about to be used in ways nobody had ever tested outside of simulations. Danny had been brought aboard the Grey Dawn for the command briefing. Standing in the massive war room, surrounded by captains and commanders from across the fleet, he felt like he had stepped from a lifeboat onto the deck of an aircraft carrier. The scale of what humanity had assembled was staggering, but the scale of what was coming was worse. Based on Captain Holt's intelligence and our own long-range scans, Lawson said, standing before the holographic map of the system, the Shrade main fleet numbers approximately 15,000 warships. Many of them are significantly larger than our heaviest vessels. They outnumber us roughly 12 to 1. The room absorbed this quietly. These were career officers. They did not panic at bad odds. But 12 to 1 was not bad odds. 12 to 1 was a death sentence by any conventional measure. "They have numbers and size," Lawson continued. "We have speed, coordination, and something they have never encountered before. An enemy that fights smart and adapts under fire. We are not going to meet them head-on. We are going to make them bleed from every direction until they break." The battle plan was built around humanity's strengths. Small wolf-pack groups of destroyers and frigates would strike fast at the edges of the Shrade formation, hitting supply ships and command vessels before pulling back. The heavy cruisers would form rotating defensive screens around the Vaethari homeworld, cycling in and out to maintain a constant wall of firepower. The carriers would launch fighter wings in coordinated waves, targeting Shrade weapon systems and engines. And the dreadnoughts, including the Grey Dawn, would anchor the center and draw the Shrade's attention, while the smaller ships did their work. "This is not going to be clean," Lawson said. "We are going to lose ships. We are going to lose people. But every minute we hold this system is a minute those 900 million souls on that planet get to keep breathing. That is what we are here for. That is all that matters." The Schrade arrived 6 hours later. They came out of faster than light in a formation that made the human fleet look like a handful of pebbles thrown against a mountain. 15,000 warships, dark and angular and massive, spreading across the system like a stain. The largest ones were nearly 2 miles long, bristling with weapons that glowed with a sickly orange light. Behind the warships came the harvester ships, enormous vessels designed to strip a planet of its resources down to the bedrock. The Schrade commander broadcast a single message on all frequencies. Nora translated it in real time, her voice flat and professional despite the fear in her eyes. "You are not part of this harvest. Leave, and you will not be collected." Lawson listened to the message. Then he opened a channel that broadcast on every frequency the human fleet could reach. Military bands, civilian bands, even the old emergency channels that had not been used in decades. "This is Admiral Greg Lawson of the United Earth Fleet," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of a man who had made his peace with what was about to happen. "We are not leaving." The Schrade attacked immediately. The first wave was overwhelming, thousands of ships surging forward in a massive frontal assault designed to crush the human fleet through sheer force. It was the tactic the Schrade had used against every species they had ever encountered, and it had always worked. It did not work today. The human fleet scattered and reformed in seconds, breaking into wolfpack groups that cut into the Schrade flanks like knives. Destroyers raced along the edges of the enemy formation at full speed, firing volleys of missiles into the gaps between Schrade warships, and then vanishing before the return fire could find them. Fighters swarmed the larger Schrade vessels, targeting their engine arrays and sensor clusters with surgical precision. The Schrade responded with raw firepower. Their weapons carved through space in sheets of burning orange energy, and when they hit a human ship, the results were devastating. The frigate Pale Horse, Danny's old escort, was struck by 3 simultaneous beams from a Schrade battlecruiser and broke apart in a flash of light that burned itself into the eyes of everyone who saw it. The destroyer Redfield took a direct hit to its reactor and vanished in a silent explosion that left nothing but expanding gas. But for every human ship that fell, 5 or 6 Schrade vessels were torn apart. The Wolfpack tactics were working. Human ships moved in coordinated groups, sharing targeting data in real time, adjusting their attacks moment by moment based on how the Schrade responded. When the Schrade shifted to counter one group, 3 others would strike from different angles. When the Schrade concentrated their firepower on a single target, the target would pull back behind a defensive screen while fresh ships moved in to replace it. The Schrade had never seen anything like this. They were a species built for dominance through overwhelming force, and they had conquered dozens of civilizations using that single strategy. They did not know how to fight an enemy that bent instead of breaking, that retreated and then attacked from a new direction, that seemed to learn from every exchange and come back sharper each time. 7 hours into the battle, Lawson ordered the boarding action. Sergeant Pete Garza and his Marine squad launched from the Iron Meridian in boarding pods. Small, fast, heavily armored capsules designed to punch through a ship's hull and deliver soldiers directly inside. Their target was a Schrade command carrier, a massive vessel that was coordinating a large portion of the enemy fleet through a central array. The boarding was violent. The pods slammed into the carrier's hull hard enough to rattle Garza's teeth, and the moment the hatches blew open, his squad was fighting. The inside of the Schrade ship was dark, hot, and built for beings much larger than humans. The corridors were wide enough to drive a truck through, and the Schrade soldiers they encountered were armored, fast, and vicious. Garza lost 3 Marines in the first 10 minutes. He lost 2 more getting to the coordination array. By the time they reached their objective, his squad was down to half strength, and Garza himself had taken a hit to his left arm that left it hanging useless at his side. But they reached the array, and Garza planted the charges himself, one-handed, while Sam Ortiz held the corridor behind him against a wave of Schrade soldiers with nothing but a rifle and a determination that bordered on insanity. The charges blew, the coordination array went dark, and across the battlefield, an entire flank of the Schrade fleet stumbled, ships losing their synchronized movement, turning into each other's firing lines, suddenly blind and confused. Vince Daly saw the opening from the bridge of the Iron Meridian. He had been watching the battle unfold for hours, tracking patterns, looking for the moment when the enemy's formation would crack. This was it. All Wolfpack groups converge on Sector 7, he called out. Hit them now, hit them hard, and do not stop. The human fleet surged into the gap like water through a broken dam. Destroyers and cruisers poured fire into the disorganized Schrade flank, and the damage was catastrophic. Schrade ships, suddenly without coordination, began colliding with each other, firing wildly, breaking formation. Nora, still monitoring Schrade communications from her station, heard something change. For hours, the Schrade had communicated with cold, efficient confidence. Now the tone was different. Confused at first, then angry, and then, beneath the anger, something she had never heard from them before: fear. The Schrade did not know how to be afraid. They had never been challenged, never been hurt, never been pushed back. And now this small, young species from a tiny corner of the galaxy was tearing them apart, and they did not understand how or why. The battle raged for 14 hours total. By the end, the Schrade armada was broken. Over 9,000 of their ships were destroyed or drifting dead in space. The surviving vessels scattered in every direction, fleeing into deep space without formation or coordination. A fleet that had terrorized an entire region of the galaxy, running from a species they had dismissed as beneath notice. The human fleet had paid a heavy price: 310 ships destroyed, another 200 badly damaged, thousands of sailors and marines dead or wounded. The cost was enormous, and the silence that fell over the fleet when the last Schrade ship jumped away was not the silence of celebration. It was the silence of exhaustion, grief, and something that might have been relief, but was too heavy to feel like anything good. Danny stood on the bridge of the Iron Meridian, which had taken damage along its port side and was venting atmosphere from 2 decks. He was alive. Most of his crew was alive. And below them, a planet full of 900 million beings who had expected to die was still there, still breathing, still lit by a sun that the Schrade would never harvest. A communication came through from the Vathari homeworld. Olin's face appeared on the screen. The alien looked at Danny, and then past him at the stars full of wreckage and slowly fading fire. For a long moment, the high speaker said nothing. Then Olin spoke, and Nora translated in a voice that was barely a whisper. "We sent our voice into the dark to be remembered. We did not expect the dark to answer." Danny closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. The fires went out slowly. It took weeks for the last of them to die on the Vathari homeworld. And even after the flames were gone, the smoke hung in the atmosphere like a bruise that would not heal. But it was healing, slowly, painfully, and with help that the Vathari had never asked for and still did not fully understand. Their world was coming back to life. Human medical ships entered orbit within hours of the battle's end. Doctors and nurses who had trained to treat human bodies found themselves learning Vathari biology on the fly. working alongside Vathari healers in makeshift hospitals that stretched across the ruins of cities. The Vathari were fragile in ways humans were not. Their wings could not regenerate if broken, and their respiratory systems were sensitive to the ash that filled the air. But they were resilient in other ways, and the human medical teams adapted quickly, as humans always did. Engineering crews came next. The orbital infrastructure that had taken the Vathari centuries to build had been shattered in weeks, and rebuilding it would take years. But human engineers did not see a problem that would take years. They saw a problem that started today, and they got to work. Temporary stations were assembled from salvaged materials and prefabricated modules shipped from Earth. Power was restored to the largest population centers within 10 days. Clean water filtration systems were up and running in 2 weeks. Supply convoys began arriving from human space, long caravans of cargo ships carrying food, medicine, building materials, and equipment. The convoys ran continuously, a lifeline stretching across 1,000 light-years of empty space, and the logistics of keeping it going were a nightmare that Katie Dunn somehow managed with 3 hours of sleep a night and more coffee than any doctor would recommend. Danny did not rest during those first weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pale horse breaking apart. He saw the list of names, the dead, the missing, the wounded. He saw the face of a young Marine named Liz Coburn, who had died during the boarding action. 23 years old, from a small town in Colorado, whose parents he would have to write a letter to when he got home. He carried those things with him the way soldiers always carry them, not as memories, but as weight. And he kept moving, because stopping meant feeling all of it at once. 3 weeks after the battle, on a clear morning, when the smoke had finally thinned enough to see the sky, Danny went down to the surface of the Vathari homeworld for the first time. Olin met him in a public square, in what had been one of the planet's largest cities. The buildings around them were damaged, cracked walls, collapsed roofs, scorch marks from orbital strikes, but the square itself had been cleared. Vathari workers were rebuilding a fountain in the center, and nearby, a group of Vathari children were playing. They were small, their wings still soft and translucent, and they chased each other in circles with a joy that seemed impossible given everything that had happened. Danny watched them for a while. Olin stood beside him, tall and still, wings folded in that careful way they always held them. "Your people are remarkable," Olin said through a small translation device that Nora had built for them. The device could not capture the music of Olin's voice, but it carried the meaning well enough. "They are just doing their jobs," Danny said. "No," Olin replied, "they are doing more than that, and you know it." The alien turned those large, dark eyes on Danny. "I have a question I have been wanting to ask you since the day you arrived. Your species is young. You have limited resources. You lost hundreds of ships and thousands of your people coming here. Why?" Danny did not answer right away. He watched the children playing and thought about what to say. He thought about giving a speech about duty or honor or the right thing to do. But Olin deserved better than a speech. Olin deserved the truth. "Where I come from," Danny said slowly, "we have a long history, and a lot of it is ugly. There were times when people were dying, whole groups of people, millions of them, and the rest of the world knew about it and did nothing. They looked away. They told themselves it was not their problem. And those people died, and afterward, everyone said, never again. But it kept happening. Over and over, it kept happening. Because saying never again is easy. Actually showing up is hard." He paused. The children laughed at something, and the sound was bright and strange in the ruins around them. "When we heard your signal," Danny continued, "every person who voted to send the fleet was answering every call that ever went unanswered in our history. We did not come here because we are brave or because we are good. We came because we have been the ones who did not come before, and we carry that with us. It is a scar, and this time we decided to do something about it." Olin was quiet for a long time. The alien looked at the children, then at the workers rebuilding the fountain, then at the human engineers on a nearby rooftop repairing a power relay. "Your species is strange," Olin said finally. "You carry your wounds not as weakness, but as fuel." Danny smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that came from a place deeper than happiness. "Yeah," he said, "that is about right." Back on Earth, the cost of the war settled over everything like dust. Memorials were held in every city, on every colony, on every station. The names of the dead were read aloud in ceremonies that lasted hours. 3,112 human lives lost. Each name was a person, someone's child, someone's friend, someone's whole world. The weight of it was enormous, and no amount of victory could make it light. The political debate continued, as it always did. Some said the intervention had been reckless, that Earth had risked too much for strangers. Others said it was the finest thing humanity had ever done. The argument would go on for years, maybe forever. That was the nature of such things. Admiral Lawson retired from active command 2 months after the fleet returned home. He did it quietly, without ceremony, the way he had done everything in his career. But he gave one final address, standing in the same council chamber where he had argued for intervention, and his words were brief. "I have given many orders in my career," he said. "Some were right, some were wrong. Some I will never be sure about. But there is one order I am certain of, and it is the one that sent our fleet across the galaxy to fight for people we had never met. I am certain of it, not because we won, but because we went, that is all." He stepped down, and that was the end of Greg Lawson's service. He moved to a small house on the coast of Maine, and was not heard from much after that, though Danny visited him once a year, and they sat on his porch and drank coffee, and did not talk about the war. The galactic consequences unfolded slowly, like ripples in water. Word of the battle spread across dozens of civilizations, carried by traders, diplomats, and the Vithari themselves. Many species had known about the Shrade. Some had even been threatened by them. All of them had chosen to look away, to stay quiet, to hope the Shrade would pass them by. And then a young, small, unremarkable species from a modest star system had crossed the galaxy and fought them. Not for territory, not for resources, not for power, but because they had heard someone in pain and could not bring themselves to ignore it. That changed things. Diplomatic channels opened. Trade agreements followed. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive or unimportant began sending envoys. Not because they feared human warships, though they respected them now, but because they recognized something in humanity that was rare in the galaxy. The willingness to bleed for someone else. The Vithari became humanity's closest allies. They shared 12,000 years of scientific knowledge, star charts covering regions of space humans had never dreamed of, cultural histories that filled libraries, and medical advances that extended human life by decades. The partnership transformed both civilizations in ways that neither could have predicted. Pete Garza went home to his family in Texas. His arm healed, mostly. He never talked about the boarding action, but sometimes his wife would find him sitting on the back porch at night, looking up at the stars with an expression she could not read. Carla Webb was promoted and given command of Outpost Gideon. She still listened to the noise of the universe every night, but now she listened differently, because she knew that somewhere out there, the things she heard might matter. Nora Castillo published the first comprehensive study of the Vithari language and was awarded honors she did not care about. What she cared about was the small translation device she had built for Olin, which the high speaker wore every day for the rest of their life. Danny Holt stayed in the service for 3 more years, then retired. He never fully shook the weight of what he had carried, but he learned to live with it. the way all soldiers do. Decades later, a HFY historian sat down to record the event for posterity. The historian spent years gathering accounts, studying records, interviewing survivors on both sides. When the work was finally complete, it ran to thousands of pages, covering every detail of the signal, the convoy, the mobilization, and the battle. But the ending was simple. The historian wrote that the signal had never been meant to summon anyone. It was a whisper sent into the void by a dying civilization, a final act of dignity, a hope that someone, someday, would find it and know that the HFY had existed. It was a farewell. But a species called humans found it, and they misunderstood it. They heard a farewell and thought it was a cry for help. And because they thought someone needed them, they came. They crossed the stars with everything they had, fought a war against impossible odds, and bled for a people they had never met. The historian's final words would be quoted for centuries, across dozens of civilizations, in languages that had not yet been invented when the words were first written. They came not because they were called, but because for them, hearing was enough.